Well, welcome to the first colloquium for January of 2015. I didn't have the opportunity to do many introductions last term because I was teaching. I now have the privilege to invite or welcome our guests and our speakers. Today we have Peter Maille. Most of you know Peter. The bio that I have on him, and I quote from an email: husband, father of two, unlikely holder of an econ PhD, bane of or boon to some EOU students, and today's presenter. This topic is quite interesting. I want to know how we can help students fail and when we get out of it. So Peter, take it away.
You misread the title. That wasn't quite the intention. Yeah. A lot of people helped with this, okay, even though, I couldn't fit them all on there, actually, okay. So thanks a lot. Thank you. I must be nervous. My mouth is keeps going dry. I've gone to drink of water 2 or 3 times. But I was saying that I'm not used to presenting stuff that I know so little about. This is quite a new direction, for what I've looked at. As a student of economics, I get to watch people and see what they do in response to the incentives. But, usually I pester farmers. Now I'm looking at students. It's very different. So it's, new. It's a work in progress, but it's all somebody else's fault. Any mistakes? Not mine. Not true. Please, I'm looking for input. This whole thing, though, you watch 2 kids and their friends as they go through school. Academic standards, you talk about a grounding experience, to work with a parade of students who kind of are struggling. And so for 4 years, that's what I did. And the outgoing, Steve A., he basically, oh, thank you. He basically said, go ahead, look at how these students fare once they've gone through, say, probation and suspension, that kind of thing. Well, that's where I started 2 years ago, and this is kind of where I ended up. It isn't exactly the same thing, but that's what got things going. We're not talking about a small group of students. You get that email at the beginning of this term, there was 438 names on it. And that's actually, across many universities, we're talking about a lot of people. 15%, 20%, 30% of the students. Probation, suspension. Now, I also think that this is a special group of students because, the high performers, they're going to do okay. It's fun working with them, we know it, but, these are the folks that the return to our effort is big. If we can actually change their trajectory. This No Child Left Behind and maybe Oregon's response to it could make it worse if our response is just to, use these sanctions or, basically negative feedback more. I also think that our little model, these guys are such black boxes. And this might be another little piece that helps us better understand what the heck, why that person did what they did. Students, how many students are here? There's a couple of them? You guys are so hard to understand. So hard. Now there's that curve. I'm going to keep looking over there, ignoring the axis. There's that inverted U. And the first time it was actually formally observed, these guys were shocking mice. And they found out that, lo and behold, the mice, before they actually got electrocuted to death, they stopped behaving as well as they had, they stopped learning the desired habit formation, right? And it kind of surprised them. And basically that the mice, instead of just continually saying, oh, I better learn this habit better, all of a sudden they started saying, oh, God, I got to get away from this electric shock. And so they started getting kind of distracted and learning the habit less. Now, in economics, there's a standard way that we look at that kind of relationship. You can look at it like as diminishing returns, too much of a good thing. Total revenue, price times quantity, right? Price times quantity. If you increase price, you increase total revenue. And that's that direct effect price has on total revenue, positive. Total revenue, price times quantity. If you increase quantity, if you sell more at a given price, you increase total revenue. So there's a positive link there. But we know that when you increase price, you decrease quantity. Price goes up, people buy less. Okay? So price has this odd positive direct effect and negative indirect effect. And that's about as simple as we can get. It's really easy to show with simple numbers what we're talking about there. The result is this inverted U. Okay, on the left side of that, you increase price. Now, if a white cat comes shooting in here and grabs that screen, it's because our cat is hearing me click on this thing. And this is what he uses. He's going to, that red dot. Right now, he's sitting at the house going, well, I hear it, but I don't see it. Here's where an increase in price will increase total revenue. But if you keep increasing price, then you drive quantity down so low that price times quantity, total revenue, it starts to decrease total revenue. Okay, it's just and that one, like I said, is very easy to model. 3 other quick applications of this inverted U thing. The Laffer curve. How many have heard of the Laffer curve? Yeah, students are bad with this. This is big. This was Ronald Reagan's justification for his tax cuts. As you increase the tax rate, well, for a while you increase tax revenue. It's still pretty low, so your incentives to work aren't harmed too much. You don't have a big reason to avoid the taxes. It goes up. But all of a sudden, if the tax rate gets real high, then people start finding ways to get around them. Or they start saying, why am I working? I'm just giving all my money back to the government. And for what it's worth, what was the marginal tax rate under Kennedy when this was actually maybe a valid argument? 90%. When my students, I ask them if they think that taxes are higher now than they were in the 60s, they say, absolutely. Say, 90% now. So when Kennedy cut them, they were way over there. Now we're cutting them, and we're over here. Interesting. Income inequality. Okay, North Korea, very little income inequality. You increase inequality a little bit, all of a sudden you've got a good reason to work. It's hard here. There's not much incentive on the left-hand side to work. And so when you increase that incentive, economic growth can increase. But over here, when Bill Gates has all of our money, and everybody else has a buck, social cohesion kind of falls apart. The prosperity is not shared, and like income growth, economic growth can fall. Last one, crime prevention. Throw a bunch of people in jail. Well, for a while, you remove criminals. But if you do it enough, then all of a sudden, you're generating a lot of single-parent households that put the kids that are in them at risk. They end up in jail, or more likely to be in jail. And, if every other household has somebody that's been in jail, all of a sudden, it's the norm. It doesn't have that same, fear. So you can actually lower safety, increase the crime rate by throwing more and more people in jail. Very odd. Okay, so that brings us to what we're talking about. Okay, increasing negative feedback. Well, I'm saying that we can respond positively to it for a while, but, eventually people get tired of getting beat about the head and shoulders and keep doing it, it falls. It's tricky. To my knowledge, like I said, I'm new to it. I don't know much written on this approach. So, and when I say academic performance, what I mean are things like GPA, high, Dean's List, scholarships. Okay? Negative feedback, low grades, detention, probation, you're off the team, blah, that kind of thing. Now, negative feedback, I have students who are happy as clams to get a C, and I have students who are in tears when they get a B. So that's part of it. This model doesn't really capture that very well, but negative feedback is relative as heck. There's no positive feedback in it. That just would have made it more complicated. Okay, so in one way we can just say, consider positive feedback held constant. The old all else equal thing. Alternatively, this dynamic elements towards the bottom there of the list, I don't think you necessarily stay here. I think that over time, you accumulate kind of, as your academic performance, your GPA goes up, you gather at a higher, click, click, click. You kind of end up here performance-wise. Or you kind of go down. All of a sudden, additional negative feedback attracts negative feedback, and you're driven down. Okay, so this is quite a simplification. Okay, if you're wondering about how it would actually work in the real world. But we need to look at the mechanisms, right? That price, quantity, there's a lot of intuitive appeal to that shape. It just makes common sense. But you got to, if we want to test anything or better understand what's going on, then we need to say explicitly what we think is actually happening. And the best I could do, there's three mechanisms. When we provide support, say to struggling students, that's going to increase performance academically because our counselors work hard. Remedial courses are designed to help these students do better. But man, oh man, they can be burdensome. They can take effort and time. And every time you throw up some new thing for somebody to do, well, you add a hurdle, and as those hurdles go up, performance goes down. We want, these guys focused on learning the material as quickly and fast as they can. And when they're doing something else, that's not necessarily happening. Even though there's something else, I'm thinking of the administration of it. Okay, not necessarily the feedback they're getting. Anybody can raise their hand anytime. Well, yeah. Okay. The beginning of this academic year, when somebody asked you, you said, well, and then I show them all the good stuff they did on their paper. And the question was, well, you show them, the bad stuff? We got to fix it. And your response was, these are wounded people. And yep, yeah, that's what we're talking about. They don't need that. Yeah. Oop. Sanctions. Now we're talking removal from, say, the football team. Nobody likes that. I've been on academic probation. I didn't like that. I got off there as quick as I could. And so we have an incentive to shed those things, and that boosts performance. Okay, and that's what we talk about usually. That's why we do these things. But man, we are also taking them off the team. Maybe not here, maybe in middle school, high school, we're putting them into detention. We're not letting them go on field trips. Okay, so that decreases this positive engagement that we don't want to decrease. So you do too much of it, and all of a sudden the nice positive effect is overwhelmed by that negative effect. Gives you that shape. Third one, sanctions. Nobody likes them. We want to get academic standing back. our GPA falls, let's drive that thing back up. And so that's going to, positively affect academic performance. Opportunities. If I know or I think that I can go to any school in the country, then I'm going to work hard. Okay? But if, I can, maybe get into the community college, well, my effort goes down. And that's what's happened when all of a sudden somebody doesn't have a 4.0 coming out of high school, doesn't have a 3.0, is sitting on something like a 2 or 2.5. We think that, the bigger the opportunity, the better the performance. And when you come out of high school with a bad record, all of a sudden your possibilities are limited. Okay? We're good? So there's like 3 things that I think are making that curve shaped like that. Now we do this because that's a model and it's testable, right? And so I think that if in fact it's true, then if a student's over here, the upward sloping part, somebody who's accumulated relatively little negative feedback, a dose of negative feedback would boost performance. Somebody over here, somebody who's accumulated lots of negative feedback, a little shot of negative feedback, performance decreases. Seems like something, you could at least try. So, at the end of last semester, I printed those things up and pasted them around. And worked very hard with Travis. Travis laid this thing out using Blackboard and put a little experiment up there. Okay? Oop, no. So that flyer pointed you to the testing center. And the testing center folks guided you to my sandbox that James made for me. And that was what students saw, okay? There's the IRB, things. It's anonymous, and, you can get out if you want. This is something voluntary. To complete the thing, go ahead, click on the assessment trial button, and get going. And so, part 1 is demographic. Gender, age, high school GPA, college GPA, dean's list, probation, suspension, a little bit of general information to try to help me figure out where people might be on that continuum, or that seemed, based on the reading, to maybe have an impact. So they fill that out, and then they click on part 2. And take those 13 true or false questions. You ready? The principle that people will exploit opportunities to do what is best for others is the basis for all predictions by economics about individual behavior. True or false? True. She said false. And of course, my guess is you do it for yourself, not others, right? We're done. Yeah, we're done. Okay, but we're not gonna. It'd be fun to go through it, but that's not what you came for your cookies for. Now, we didn't do all those questions. That's fine. Now that you made it bigger, it's a little hard to get to OK. So that thing says, oh, good job. Click OK. OK. Oh, I got 1 out of 13. Whoa, am I, right? And so, okay. And here's the negative feedback that this little experiment delivered. If you answered 10 or more correctly, we recommend you proceed directly to a 200 level econ course. Fewer, 9 or less, we recommend a 100 level econ course. Okay? I had to be careful. I didn't want to hurt people's self-esteem. And then, please click on link 3. Take another quiz drawn. Those questions are drawn from the same pool, right? Another 13 questions. Take those things, and I get to see if you did better or worse. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Sounds wonderful. Well, yeah. You know, first round results, summary form, you know, we don't have many students. You want to know what $50 will buy you? Buy about 22 students. Unfortunately, the worst thing about this was that, and it's related to just not having many students, people that have a history of probation, in other words, they answered that they were in or had probation at some time, none of them passed that thing. So I couldn't tell their response. You know, there wasn't anything I could do about that. Quiz 2, the darn thing was came from the same pool, but the averages were higher, whatever. I mean, given 13 questions, it's pretty darn easy to have 1 or 2 zingers in there. All of a sudden, the average is lower. That's fine. We can account for that. In terms of who gets a lot of negative feedback versus who has accumulated relatively little negative feedback, you know, to distinguish between students who might be here versus students who might be here, I use that probation. This is not a perfect measure by any means, but that was the one thing that students knew. I mean, they didn't know their GPA or Dean's List. I remember when I was on the Dean's List. But too many of them didn't fill in those things. Everybody filled in the probation one. And I can see that. In general, yeah, you know, if you've been on probation or, you know, you have a history of it, then you have a sense for this. Whether or not you extricated yourself, that's, you know, another good thing to consider. I didn't do it. Given that gap, I couldn't really test the hypothesis as well as I'd like, but I was able to look at, okay, we have both sides of the coin for people who had the negative feedback. Unfortunately, the students who had a history of probation, the pale one, their change from quiz 1 to quiz 2 was bigger than the ones that hadn't. I don't think this little clicker is working very well. Can I use my pointer? There you go. I mean, this is what I use in class, and it also is threatening. Yeah, the students under probation improve their scores more than the ones that didn't. Now, that's unfortunate because that's exactly the opposite of what I hypothesized. 2 possibilities. One, you know, we're not talking about many people or highly significant numbers. They're not. So, in other words, we're not confident in that result to begin with. And the second one that's kind of convincing to me is that you got to keep in mind the students who had a history of probation scored lower. And so, on average, it was like 1.4 points lower. So, it's easy for them to increase their scores more. Just a mechanical thing. You know, if your average is 8.4, then a couple more is almost perfect. Whereas if your average is 5 or 6, it's easy to bump it up a lot. Kind of a ceiling effect. Interestingly, Blackboard was not designed to do this, right? So very awkward. Travis worked like crazy to figure out how to make it work. It did offer one opportunity, though, and that was you can see when somebody created and then submitted. So I could see how long people took on things. How long do they take on quiz 1 versus how long on quiz 2? There's good kind of evidence that, assuming everybody is capable, what counts is how long they're willing and able to sit there and work on it. So I like this result, even though the statistics are still weak. The probationary students who got negative feedback spent about nearly a minute less doing the second quiz than the first one, whereas the other students actually worked harder. They said, "Oh, darn it, we're going to do better," right? That was interesting. So, didn't have enough people. Let's do it again, okay? And thanks to Carolyn and Liz, this round I made 2 changes. One was to use 3 sections from a given class. Instead of this flyers, didn't spend $50 either. My wife was like, so that's different. It isn't a random sample of students. It's these 3 sections. And I lowered the threshold for passing. That's totally arbitrary. And so by lowering it 2 points, I was hoping to fill that gap. Get, some people in all 4 groups. Students A and students B, positive and negative results for both. Fill the gap. Unfortunately, or maybe we should be happy about this, there are relatively few students on probation. Good job, you guys. Yeah. And unfortunately also, this is kind of the kind of learning you do when you do these things instead of try to just think about them. They took it as a group, unlike the folks the first round that came in and sat down and worked through it and then left. They were in there, they were brought there and they did it. And so you see that average time on quiz 2, I think that something was going on where they just basically, maybe their buddies got up and so they finished. You know what I mean? So I really wasn't able to use the time thing on this one. But like I said, we've got, in terms of changes from between quiz 1 and quiz 2, now we've got all 4 groups. 4 meaning, people, students A, students B, positive and negative feedback. Green is students with a history of probation, okay? These folks are the ones that, quote-unquote, passed. Their second attempt fell by 1.5. The people that failed, they did better. That's, once again, not what's supposed to happen, okay? But we're talking about like 2 and 3 students. So that's, we can't be very confident about it. It is interesting, though, because the no history of probation, in other words, folks that might be over here, the people who got positive feedback didn't really do much. But the ones that got negative feedback seem to have responded. Okay? And, I got this pre-approved by John, but he hasn't really scrutinized it yet. When you, first of all, because quiz 2 is harder, unfortunately, it's hard to control everything, I subtracted the means. So this D mean is just, I pulled out the averages to get at the change. So the different, the change in quizzes from 1 to 2, their scores. In other words, if they scored an 8 on the second one and a 5 on the first one, this would be +3. Well, when you look at how scores changed as a function of probation and negative feedback, what we're looking at is the fact that that's a negative. It's not significant, but it's going in the right direction, especially given when you think about it, there's only 5 students in there. So it seems like, this indicates that probationary status lowers by, a little over a point people's second attempt and controlling for the rest of it. So we like that result. In other words, it may be consistent with what we're talking about. Of course, the qualification being that p-value 0.26. It's not very significant. So, what I draw from it, I guess I'm not surprised. I'm disappointed. I'd like to have everything work out perfectly fine, but frankly, if it had, my guess is, if I was you, I'd be more skeptical, right? And it's complicated. It is definitely complicated. That Laffer curve, the tax rate, tax revenue thing? There's many years of data, lots of numbers, and nobody knows when that thing bends. It's wonderful listening to, economists debate when that curve hits a peak and starts going down. What tax rate? So they don't know that, let alone this. Okay. And like even if the results are good, I'd still be quite skeptical. The intuitive basis is good. The results were mixed. So those mechanisms are tricky. I want to keep figuring those out and talking about them. We need more experiments, and with that in mind, nobody here from the testing center? Good, okay. We need to use those guys. The right kind of software, which I don't think is, I would hope isn't expensive. All of a sudden, we could be doing really cool experiments there, And, so what do we do? I mean, for heaven's sakes, the bottom line is, how do we respond to that shape? I think the convocation for freshmen that we did, in a way, that's a response. That one mechanism that had kind of opportunities falling, doors are closing, right? This is over here, doors are closing. Here, doors are opening. Well, when they come here, whang, hey, this is you, the big door's opening. People go from here to many different places. It's amazing. Probation, suspension. Now, I haven't been on the committee for 2 years, but you know what I was doing 20 minutes before coming here? Email. I have a hold. I can't register. I can't get my schedule fixed. Can we meet? I wonder if there aren't some ways to smooth those things. Do we need those holes? Or do we want me to be responsible for running those guys down, meanwhile letting them get signed up for classes, before week 1? Now, maybe you should have been doing it a little earlier, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. There are schools, when I started looking at it, they don't put people on probation that haven't accumulated a certain number of credits. In other words, first-term freshmen, you don't go on probation.
Not even eligible for probation.
No, forget it. And some will say 1.7, 1.8. For heaven's sakes, all it takes is one bad class, and all of a sudden your GPA is low. You're on probation. Then you could do better. But if you don't get it above a 2, you're suspended. And, the information on people who succeed after those two things is not good. We lose a lot of people that way. Now, some people are going to lose, but maybe partly it's because they're on suspension and probation, right? Not despite. A discussion along those lines, I think, would be wonderful. This guy, failure is not an option. Knowledge is Power program. You guys familiar with the KIP? It's very intense. They take very low-performing high schools and just change everything. But what you see is college going shift from like 10% to 90%. they're not screwing around. It's amazing, the results. But these kids are like in homework classes till 10 o'clock every night. And they come in 2 hours before school starts. They really don't screw around. But then, frankly, the swim team at the high school, they do that too. They can do it for swimming. They could do it for homework. The Tiger Mother thing, you familiar with that one? That lady's a maniac, right? But the idea is it's a cultural thing. An Asian woman who happens to be a law professor at Yale wrote an article. I think she also wrote a book, but the article is what really made it kind of. She screams and yells at her kids until they're crying, right? And she talks about why they do that. And basically, failure is not an option. Now, the thing is, that's not easy, right? In economics, we try to figure out where things should be and then what forces might be acting on them to make it so you don't end up there. And the fact is, when we're looking at this student who's going to be a challenge, what forces might be acting on us to make it so we don't do what we should or could? It's hard. These guys are like, you don't get to just deliver the grade and send a packet. You run them down across campus. We know it's risky because all of a sudden, wait a minute. A policy should be the same for everybody. How can you treat some people differently? That's really hard and it's risky. So what do? Tough. I think that maybe with this kind of stuff in mind, maybe I was destined to look at this because, I make my students come in. If they get a low score, they come in and revise that thing up. But they have to come into my office and you sit down across from me and it takes a lot of work, and they don't like it, and it doesn't work for everybody. Certainly, we still don't have everybody getting through my classes. But boy, I think it's important. Failure is not an option. Boy, that would change things. If we just said, if this student isn't going to do any better, then I'm going to do what I need to do. It's kind of la-la land, but middle school, high school. Now, I talked with the principal, Mr. Baxter, and he was very interested in this. And he, by and large, is sympathetic. He agrees. For example, athletics, the academic requirements, you could consider them pretty low. He said a lot of times we add to them. But at the same time, there are kids who, if you take them off that team, do you think they're going to do better? And the answer is no. They're not going to do better. It's going to give them more time to screw around. It's going to not teach them to succeed, which is what failure is not an option. Here, you're teaching people to succeed instead of kind of making, say, like that crime prevention model, where we kind of, in a way, we're teaching people to be criminals by putting them amongst criminals so much and by making crime the norm, or not crime, but jail time the norm in a neighborhood. You kind of get, okay, well, that's where the title, Teaching People to Fail, comes from. You've got to teach them to learn, too. And sometimes that's hard. So it'd be great. You won't deny me an opportunity to participate in the community, regardless of where I stand academically, if it's not going to help me. Let's see people say no to that. Because the opposite is, you're going to hurt me, but you're going to do it anyway. And EOU fellows. A friend, back when we were in Morgantown, kind of university town, right? Our neighbor, he was a law professor in Stanford. She was a stay-at-home mom who was a physician from Princeton. Whew, man. And they had 2 kids, so he's on his, I think he's Princeton, right? But he's doing a gap year. So we look in gap year program. You are accepted, Princeton, you spend a year frolicking with other Princetonites in Europe, right? some of these guys, like when I was a freshman, there are other things going on in our heads. And so it's, what do? You don't want everybody to say, get a job. Because a year later, all of a sudden they got a car, and they got a girlfriend, and they got married, and they're gone. You know, they may well do fine, but it's hard to say. So without backsliding, let's get them involved in some gap year program that doesn't have them, you know, that lets them kind of work, communicate, talk, but not necessarily, but amongst people who are like them, moving forward, not backsliding. I think that when you know, maybe for me, we could, you know, keep me, I don't want to make anybody mad, to say that you need to succeed academically, maintain 2.0, whatever, that's like saying you're not allowed to come to UU until you're at least 5'8". I mean, it's an organic developmental thing. And, you know, we treat people under 18, the justice system treats them differently for a reason. We don't, you know, and maybe we should. And so that opportunity right there, you know, the kind of things that come to your mind. At the end of last term, maybe with this in mind, okay, we got these kids in there, these students, they've done poorly on the first 2 tests. The 3rd test is coming. The prognosis is not good, right? But I saw that they seemed to be, they were still working hard, and so I made them a special deal. I said, okay, if you haven't missed any quizzes, you haven't skipped anything, if you pass the final, regardless of your grade, your total point total, if you pass that final, I'll give you a C-. Now the final is, in a way, cumulative, right? It's not cumulative explicitly, but if you don't know the material, at least it's to some extent, then you're not going to pass that final. So I can do that, I think, with some integrity. I mean, you know, it's hard because this is why it's hard. It's like, can I do that? I mean, I can't just give people a pass. They've got to earn it. And I think, yes, if somebody gets a passing grade on that final, I'll give them a C-. Nobody wants a C-. You know, that is hardly a good job, but it lets them move on. And another possibility, hey, I've been working hard. Why do these guys get to pass? Not a single person said anything about that. People that are shooting for an A, B, or C, they're perfectly happy to let this guy move on. You know, I went ahead and did it, and there was a student who got through. It was nice. I was happy. He had nothing to gain by doing it again. Okay, yeah. You shouldn't go into details. So that's just an example. I wonder, you know, if that isn't a way to tailor something that, you know, it wasn't easy, it was a little risky, but I think it worked. And I'm, you know, wondering if I told him this is a one-shot thing. You know, I'm not going to do this every time, but I'm going to see how it goes this time. Yeah. So thinking back to that first slide or two, you know, it's work in progress and I'm completely new. There's a lot of education and psych in here, right, that is not directly what I have studied. So I would love to hear comments or...
It's something that when I was an undergraduate back in the dark ages, if you flunked a class,
Yeah.
you couldn't retake it and have that grade go away. You could retake it.
Yeah, the grade
Get
stayed.
that grade, but you still had the F
Mm-hmm.
on your transcript and everything else. Now, almost everywhere, you take that course over again, the F goes away.
Yeah.
Is it similar to the prison example? Like, we're making failing not that bad a thing anymore. For example, I have students I know in the past that after a couple of weeks they're behind maybe 3 weeks,
Right.
they're still behind their feeling, they just say, the heck with it, I'll take it next quarter, and that grade's going to go away. Instead of sticking with it and go, gee, maybe I can work my way through this.
Right,
The penalty of failing the class goes away.
right, right. I have a response, but Nathan got his hand up there too.
Well, and I was saying there's two things being mixed. You were saying somebody bombs the first two tests and they say, well, I'm just going to quit and try it next time. That's kind of the same problem. I remember reading something a while back about punitive grading. A student doesn't make it to the test and you give them an F. If grades are supposed to be a measurement of your students' ability, first off, that's polluting your data. And then what we're dealing with here is we are complicating the data about what a student's ability is now with data about what the student's ability was in the past. So generally the way we're grading is not going to actually tell us what we want to know. If they've got an F in the past, it's always going to drag their average down, even though they might have had a turn and then really done it up.
But I guess my point is making that grade go away. Is that a positive thing? Is that less punitive, negative feedback? Or is it actually having the opposite effect? Well, it's too easy to fail a class and then take it again.
Now, here's the question. Have they, but the ones that have come back and taken it again, how well have they done? Okay, I was just thinking.
Yeah,
So if they're doing better the second time around, I would say maybe that was a positive.
There's, responding directly, there's always pluses and minuses, but I think that the ability to let people erase that earlier grade is what I'm talking about. It's a little gentler thing. It lets them shed that lower GPA and bump it back. So I think that that's a kind of thing to consider, that I would say we consider. But it isn't without risk. And there are some students who blow it off. I let people revise quizzes. So I have guys come in, they'll barely sign their name because they know they can come in and revise the quiz. I would say those people are, in a sense, already over here. We need to figure that out. In the meantime, don't, keep hammering them. Figure out something else. Detention, Fs, if it's not working, stop doing it. And there is, though, when you get somebody coming in, sometimes, and it's hard for me to say, I think that people that have retaken my classes, some don't get through again, a large chunk get through okay, and sometimes, wow, they do really well. They're some of the best students. They didn't know. They were just caught by surprise. They do really well. And if you just, if you're too easy on, all of a sudden we lose that. So, it's nice to let them erase the grade. It would be unfortunate to have those guys not take it. But on the other hand, there are some people who flunk because they know they can retake it. Yeah.
Also flunk a lot of our students for lots of different reasons. They're first-generation college students, or they have medical issues, or they're deer caught in the headlights, and they just, the first 5 weeks, they're almost paralyzed.
Yeah.
And they've already failed before they've
Yeah.
realized that they can't keep
Yeah.
going the way they've gone.
Yeah.
And it's not some intentional sort of blowing off.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to have a lot of opportunities for those students to reset.
And that teaching to fail, so for 5 weeks, that students sitting here in classes knowing they flunked.
But in my
That's no
case,
good.
There's a couple of studies that sort of support, I can't remember if it was Roger Sale or Peter Elbow, big honchos in the composition field, who did a study where they had students to whom they responded with both negative and positive, and that others they only responded positively.
Right.
The quality of the improvement of the writing was significant with it was only positive. It was so much better.
Yeah. In bowling, bowlers, they videotaped and showed one group all the things they did wrong, one group all the things the best shots they made, and they both improved. But the ones that got the positive feedback, they improved a lot more. Yeah. I'm sorry, cut you off.
Well, no, I think, and Claude Field's done these studies about stereotype expectations, where he'll say to two groups of women who are taking a math test, here, take this math test, and the other group would say, women tend to do really well on this math test. The group who are told that do really well on that math test.
Yeah.
And So there's
Yeah.
there's the self-belief piece
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
part of the study.
And this is going on. I mean, who knows what signals that my setup was sending. It's just people are difficult. It's so sensitive to that kind of thing. And Blackboard and Maille approach, it's a first cut. I'm sorry.
Peter, it seems like that this concept of early alert that we can sort of encourage to do. Going in and looking at our students at the end of the first week and at the end of the second week,
Yeah.
to see where they are. Are they checking into the course shell? Are they
Yeah.
coming to class? This early alert kind of thing, it seems like what we're trying to do is catch them before they get too far to that left side.
Yeah.
Excuse
Yeah.
me, the right side
Yeah.
of the curve. And we're trying to give them any negative feedback and to say, how can we help you? What's going on?
Yeah.
Is there something that you need assistance with? So that they don't slip too far to the
Right. Yeah.
We keep them on that up and going curve.
Or you stick a floor there.
Yeah.
They might want to respond bad, but you're not going to let them. You're going to reel them in there and talk with them and see how they're going. Yeah. That would be failure's not an option.
Yeah.
And
I think there's some data there to be gathered as well. I don't know how you fit it into it, but if we're responding actively as instructors to students who are not actively engaging in the course, does that, in a positive, supportive way, are we helping them to stay to the
Right.
that upward,
Right.
rather than falling too far to the right?
Yeah. Good question.
But your idea about probation, though, is so interesting because I was talking with an advisor with a student I've been assigned to reach out to. She passed 3 of her classes and failed 1. She did well in the other 3. She's on academic probation, right? Because a couple of them were passed, not passed. She's decided not to come back to
Yeah.
school,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly what
You play with the numbers. Somebody, straight D's their first term. They're on probation. Okay. All C's but 1 D the second term. They've improved. They're suspended. Okay. They appeal. They get straight C's for 3 years. Last term, they get a D. They're suspended and they cannot appeal. They have to sit out for a year. That's just like an extreme example of, and it's never carried to that extent. But it's, I think we could maybe try to do something a little different. I'm sorry, go, yeah.
I have a student, I have 2 students who are in their senior year having gone through suspension, probation for their entire career
Yeah.
at this point. And I think exactly what you're saying. They've been bowled over by the fact that they have a term where they've passed everything and they're dinged for it.
Yeah.
And they get to their senior year and they are 2 courses from graduating and they're dinged.
Yeah.
They're even stalled out because of the system that they're working in. And they've spent all of the 4 to 5 years they've been here being in and out of that problem area. And it just seems to me like
Yeah.
couldn't 2 courses from graduation, couldn't you just hold their hand a little bit longer?
Mhm.
One of the 2 students came to me. Actually wrote a really pretty good paper last term. Came to me this term and said, "I want to do a presentation of the paper. I want to go to a conference and do a
Right.
presentation."
Right.
This student has been in and out of suspension probation for the entire
Mhm.
career.
Mhm. Mhm.
And said
Yep.
that.
Yep. Sometimes it's inspiring because after years of getting beat up, they still will say, "I want to do something. I want to do that." Meanwhile, their colleagues, I hope to take, some high-performing students to a conference, in April. They've been doing it for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Yeah.
To what degree is our probation system now triggered by this financial aid stuff, right? It's a big deal. There's something to do with the way we gave students too much time to recover. We used to have a different, there used to be a warning term and then a probation. And it's this system now because there was some worry that we were going to lose our financial aid privileges because of the way we were allowing students to fail. So I don't know to what degree.
Yeah,
that-
athletics is the same way. I mean, there are some rules that we have no control over, you know, that are unfortunate. And maybe if we had some control over them, we wouldn't do them quite that way for everybody. Yeah, Liz, sorry.
They were poor students. When we get them, usually they've been told over and over what they can't do. That they're bad at this, they're bad at that. You know, they're bad at all of these things. And a couple of years ago, we started using the Strengths Finder assessment. Strengths Quest curriculum, if anyone's familiar with that. We started telling students, okay, these are your strengths. It's not that you're going to sit and focus on your weaknesses. You're going to take your strengths and figure out how to use those to be better at all of those things.
So do you guys have anything
That,
to say?
with some students, has worked really well. And actually, it's not going to go into the human students as well, and it'll be a need from those students. But it's a really interesting thing to sit down with those students on, you know, the right end of that curve and say, you're good at these things. Why don't you take the stuff you're good at and use that with the stuff maybe you're not so good at? And it's really interesting to see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
you're still fixing these things, but it's in a different perspective and approach.
Just a very
Oh.
quick thing, we're at the top of the hour. I would like us to recognize Peter for his presentation and then encourage people to stay and ask additional questions, so thank you.
Thank you.